Welcome to the American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division 2016 webinar series. By listening to our webinar series, you'll get the best of the best in the lean industry. Stay tuned to the end of this recording for more details. This month, our speaker is Chris Hayes, the CEO of IPS, a strategic solutions company. Chris is a full-spectrum coach and trainer with practical experience from shop floor to the boardroom. She has partnered with companies such as Dannon, ITT, Pepperidge Farms, and Thermo Fisher, where she utilizes integrated process improvement techniques that emphasize engaging the workforce, meeting objectives, and sustaining results. Now let's listen to Chris as she presents TWI, Training Within Industry.
All right. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. So hello, good morning, everyone, or I guess some of you are on afternoon right now. Paul, thanks so much for inviting me to present on this topic, one that I'm very passionate about. I've been working with TWI for a really long time, and I've seen the wonderful things they can do for companies. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to going over TWI with everybody on the call for the next hour or so. So let's begin with some fundamentals, like what is TWI? First off, there is no other supervisor training program as well-rounded and as thoroughly proven as TWI. Its methods are so well-structured that they haven't changed in 7 decades, actually over 7 decades. But I don't want anyone to take my word for it. Take the word of some of the most successful companies in the world that are using it. There's thousands of companies that I could have put up here, but I thought these ones might be familiar to at least a few of you. Toyota uses TWI. Sanyo and Carrier use TWI. Even Northrop Grumman uses TWI. TWI is a re-emerging system that has stood the test of time. Most of us have seen standardization as a foundation to lean in many versions of the lean house. There was Toyota's lean house, many different versions of that. But all of them have standardization in the foundation. Well, TWI supports standardization efforts by teaching supervisors how to standardize and why it's important to standardize. And finally, because it's an all-encompassing program, TWI inspires profound and lasting cultural change. It really empowers supervisors and allows them to sustain a true culture of continuous improvement, which has kind of been a missing thing in our lean implementations over the years. So let's talk about for a minute about where TWI came from and what it's used for. Get a little bit of history here. In World War I, a training program was established in response to the need to produce 10 times more ships than was being built at that time. The issue was that this needed to be accomplished with unskilled workers because all of the skilled workers, of course, were off at war. That particular program was ended immediately after the war was over, but it was successful. It did well for what it was worth. The training program from World War I was then resurrected in World War II, and they called it Training Within Industry. It was one of the very first emergency services established by the government. A national network of professionals was, in some words you'll see volunteered, but I'm pretty sure they were drafted from industry to develop techniques to quickly ramp up the production of the war materials in the face of yet another war-like or wartime unskilled labor pool. This time, many of the green workers during World War II were women, and they had very little experience working outside of the home. So they had to do something that would be not only effective for people that were used to working in the industries and in the manufacturing world, but those that had not a clue of anything going on. 4 men were most notably tied to TWI's development. Channing Dooley, Walter Dietz, and Michael Caine were part of the original development team in World War I and were borrowed again in World War II to help reestablish it and make it better. Another gentleman, Bill Conover, joined the 3, and together they were collectively known as the 4 Horsemen. So you'll hear that term often when you look at TWI. Channing Dooley, from his experience developing the training program in World War I, understood the importance of continuing the TWI efforts after World War II. Because remember, what happened in World War I, they did some great work, they did and a lot of work at that, and then as soon as the war was over, the program pretty much died until the emergency came up in World War II. He said, "We've learned a great deal in wartime which can and must carry over to peacetime. This is called training. Now plants must use training if they're going to survive in competitive situations and if they're going to keep on providing jobs and wages for workers." Unfortunately, his words fell on deaf ears, and in 1946, the U.S. government discontinued the program in the U.S. despite his warnings. So, did TWI go away? We already said that the U.S. government terminated the program in 1946, but where did it go? What happened to the efforts of those four horsemen? Several private groups, including the Four Horsemen, continued to provide TWI in the U.S. as well as abroad as consultants. They also continued the development of the programs and established the TWI Foundation. So other countries picked up on what we did. Great Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, all of these other countries continued to use it through the consultants and the other private groups to gain productivity increases there, but the U.S. government did not. About the same time they were doing that, using it on a consultant basis, post-World War II Japan was obviously in pretty bad shape. We did, after all, bomb the heck out of them. So General MacArthur feared that the country was going to turn to communism if we didn't aid them. So he sent in some TWI experts to help Japan. Fortunately, Japan embraced TWI and implanted it into what we now know as the Toyota production system. In the foreword to De Niro's book, Training Within Industry, which is one of the references at the end of today's presentation, John Shook relates a story in which a Toyota trainer, being questioned on whether Americans could be taught Japanese methods used at Toyota, brought out an old coffee-stained copy of a TWI service manual as proof that, yes, Americans could really learn Japanese methods. Of course, obviously somebody forgot to tell him that these really weren't Japanese methods at all. They came from our efforts of the Four Horsemen. So why now? Why are companies seeking to use the methods of a 70-plus-year-old training program? Well, there were over 2 million hits on Google when I first searched the words lean manufacturing in 2009. That seems like a lot of hits. What's the number in 2016 when I looked at it is 17 million. That's a huge increase in 7 years. What does that tell us? TWI was instrumental in developing the Toyota production system, right? Which many U.S. companies over the years have really tried diligently to copy. I'm a consultant. I've been out there teaching it for lots of years. Paul's been out there teaching it in the past, and so have many other people. But as you can see from the previous slide, the interest in imitating the success of Toyota has had with TWI. They still keep wanting more. Unfortunately, what's happened is that not many companies have really been successful in their attempt to copy that. What was missing? Mostly, for one at least, TWI. They were copying a lot of tools and not really getting the results that they wanted. TWI supports the culture change that truly allows the workers to become not only empowered to improve their workplaces, but engaged and interested in doing it. That's a huge key. In many cases, lean tools were implemented in a company with some real results. Lean tools do work. Don't get me wrong there. Lean tools are wonderful. The problem is that with each Kaizen event or event where we implemented tools, instead of sustaining the standards or the results or the standards slide backwards after we're all done. When this happens, output and benefit are decreased. If it happens too often, Most of the time, people just get frustrated and they abandon the lean efforts thinking that lean didn't work after all. Well, that's not the case. Lean does work. We just haven't been putting in the right effort to anchor it within our culture. Let's talk about the benefits of TWI for a few minutes. Although the times have changed, really some things haven't changed at all. We all need fundamental skills to help us improve. How many of you could stand to see some employee engagement where continuous improvement is the norm every day with every activity? And everyone knows it's okay to question things. I know in some of my previous employment, questioning things got you in trouble. That's not the culture that we want. What about improved quality, increased productivity, increased safety, decreased cost? What about all those things? Any takers for decrease on your scrap or rework or turnover rates? Those are the biggies as far as benefits that TWI offers, but there's also a lot of indirect benefits as well, such as increased teamwork, communication, morale, those kind of things. I know you can't answer right now as far as an audience because we're on a webinar, but I can, asking you, hey, anybody want any of those things? I can pretty much envision almost everyone's hands going up for at least one of those and maybe all of those benefits that you'd like to see in your companies. A fairly recent Gallup poll showed that 80% of employees left their jobs because of their supervisors. And that's sad. Can you imagine the benefits of 80% of your employees not moving to other companies and taking the time and effort you invested with them? Making our supervisors have the skills and the abilities that make their employees want to work with them? What would that mean to each of your companies? It would be huge. Those benefits are obviously really wonderful, but how about some financial payback? When it comes to improvements, every company is looking at the bottom line, money. It's not just the CFOs, but that's really where the rubber meets the road. We all want our businesses to make more money. If we're able to take TWI routines and use them, let's say we use them to implement 10 improvements per year per employee. That doesn't seem like a lot. How would that affect your organization's productivity, quality, safety, and cost? I know it would be huge. I've seen it. Even if it were 5 improvements per person, those things can be really huge. Let's just get a feel for something out there. Well, actually, hang on a second here. Sorry, my screen was frozen there for a second. That might be some of those technical difficulties we were looking at. All right, so the graphic on your screen that I'm showing you shows the results of the TWI implementation during World War II. If those percentages on the graph are at all representative of all companies that receive TWI training today, what would those types of numbers mean to your company? What kind of bottom line impact are we talking about with 25% increase in productivity? 25%, and these numbers, if you look at the graph, it's at least 25%. What if you were able to fill the newly found capacity you created with those improvements with business you're currently turning away or losing because of your lead times? I'm sure a few of you have issues with lead time and capacity issues. What if you were able, let's say it's not a lead time issue, maybe you don't have backlog. What if you're able to fill the capacity with new products that never would have even been possible to talk about or to see to fruition? What top line impact is that going to give you? Same thing, how about 25% or more decrease in scrap? We all know that if there's less scrap, there's going to be less rework. If there's less rework, the cost of quality decreases, and significantly. What are all those things, or what could those things benefit you? So there's a lot of real financial benefits that come from all of these things. Now, we haven't talked about the specific programs under TWI yet, but I wanted to show you just a quick little case study. In 1942, the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey implemented one of the programs under TWI called Job Methods. In 3 short years, they logged over $8 million in savings just through employee suggestions. $8 million. Now that's really nothing to sneeze about. That's a lot of money. In today's dollars, that's nearly $100 million. Distribute that out through 3 years, $33.3 million in savings a year. Again, that's amazing stuff, and these are real. This is not just made up stuff from somebody that wants to see you implement some new program in your company. Okay, so now we have a little bit of history and we understand the benefits. Let's get to talking about the TWI program itself. So the TWI program was built on the premise that every supervisor has 5 needs. The 5 needs model for good supervisors was developed through TWI during World War II from the 4 Horsemen. This model describes the 5 essential needs that must be satisfied before any supervisor can fulfill his or her responsibilities successfully. That was the belief. The TWI developers defined a supervisor to include anyone who supervises or guides the work of others, regardless of their authoritative position. So that means that you don't have to have the title of manager or supervisor in order to have these needs. The first 2 needs are types of knowledge. The last 3 needs are types of skills. Knowledge, just to kind of define that here, is something you acquire by reading a book or attending a class or a discussion. Skills, on the other hand, are learned through practice and repetition. For instance, you can gain knowledge of swimming through reading a book, but only when you actually practice the knowledge and get out there and swim are you going to gain the skill of swimming and probably not drown. So there's a big difference between the 2. The 4 programs within TWI were structured to address each of these needs. And you can see the first 2 up at the top, knowledge of work and knowledge of responsibilities, fall under program development. Knowledge of work is all about the kinds of things that you make that are going to make your company different. So it's something that the company has to define for themselves and really think about what makes them different. The knowledge of responsibilities covers everything about policies and rules and regulations and those kind of things. Again, something that the company has to define for themselves, but that's all part of actually developing the TWI program. We're not going to talk at all after this about program development. We're going to spend our time going into a deeper dive on the next 3 programs. We call those the J programs. With J programs, TWI provides all of the elements necessary to ensure that your supervisors and team members have the skill to instruct, to improve, and to work well with others. Each has a scientific approach to them, a practice routine that makes them highly effective. Using Charles Allen's 4-step method that was developed way before World War I, TWI developers created a similar approach for each of the 3 J programs. You see here that the job instruction has 4 steps, job methods has 4 steps, and job relations has 4 steps as well. If you look closely, you'll also notice that each 4-step method is set up in a scientific thinking pattern similar to what we all know and love as PDCA or PDSA. Giving each program a common 4-step pattern allowed for common traits between each program, which made it easy for supervisors to practice each method quickly. Pocket-sized cards, which you'll see in a few moments, were developed for each of the courses as well, or each of the programs as well. Surprisingly, the cards developed by TWI are almost identical to the cards used in 2003, at least, at Toyota. Apparently they didn't feel that there was a need to mess with success, and you'll see even any consultants out there or coaches that are teaching TWI have changed very little when it comes to the cards and the steps. Now let me walk you through the J programs themselves. These programs can be used in any order. base it on the needs of your individual company. Typically, as was witnessed in World War II and in Toyota, job instruction training tends to be more frequently used than the rest of the programs, possibly because of the specific needs of those particular times, but even more so now, we're looking to make sure people understand how to do things. So again, that one tends to be used most often, but it certainly does not have to be done in any particular order. We're going to start with job methods. Job methods is a methodology by which we teach supervisors and others to improve their processes. I'm actually seeing a lot more companies wanting to start with job methods than the job instruction, which is atypical of what I've seen in the past 10 years or so. This includes methods to increase productivity and quality and decrease costs. So that's what job methods looks at. It does this by making the best of the people, the equipment, the methods, the materials, all of those that are currently available. So this is what the pocket cards for job methods looks like. Remember, these are not changed or haven't changed by more than a few words in over 70 years. We're going to go through each of the steps in the next few slides, so don't worry too much if you can't readily read what's on the cards that are on the screen. You'll get all of the steps as we go through them. The job breakdown sheet is the tool we use to walk through the job method steps. We'll see it again in a few slides. I just wanted to give you a quick glance so that you could kind of see what we're doing with the stuff we discuss next. And I'll explain the form itself. Okay, so the 4 steps of job methods are methodical, just like they are in every J program, so you're going to see the same methodology there. Step 1 is all about breaking down the job so that we can see what's really going on. Step 2 is about learning to be a 3-year-old. Question, questions, questions. If you have 3-year-olds or have had them in the past, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Step 3 excuse me, is the part where we get to figure out a better way for the process to work. And finally, step 4 is about actually applying the new method. We're going to spend some time going through each one of these in the next few slides. So again, that was just a quick overview. Again, this is the job breakdown sheet. It's the main tool we use when we use job methods training. It should be filled out with a lot of detail. More detail, the better. In step 1, when we break down the job, every single movement should be recorded. This includes material handling, machine work, hand work, inspections, all of that kind of stuff happens. It's an activity, so we need to record that. You're going to fill out the top logistical fields of this form as appropriate, whatever fits. Then you're going to come down to the bottom left and start numbering and defining the steps in the process. You can include things like, sometimes I like to include the distance it takes to get from one step to the next, or maybe the time each step takes themselves. You can put in any detail about issues related to quality or safety. The important part here is that you want to be as detailed as possible. Now, most of the templates you'll find out there are the same or fairly similar from one source to another. If I remember right, this particular version came from a CD that's included in the book called the TWI Workbook. Don't quote me on that, but I see the CD form up at the top, so I'm thinking that's where I borrowed that and forgot to put the reference on there. But my point being that wherever you find your form, feel free to customize it to your own company. Add more details if you want. I wouldn't take anything away by any means, but make it your own, make it fit. Here's a quick word of caution. Oftentimes we forget steps or elements of a job that we're really familiar with. It's important not to do this exercise from a classroom or a conference room or something of that such. If you do, you're going to miss some things. Trust me on this. You're going to go through click, click, click in your head of all the things that you can think of happening, but if you really went out there, you would find that you would miss a whole lot. So you want to be writing down the details of a process as you actually watch that process. Sometimes it helps to video the process first. That's one of my favorite things to do in many different lean processes, but specifically in TWI job methods. While they didn't have the technology 70 years ago, there's no reason we shouldn't take advantage of it. But even back then, the key was to stand and watch the process and write down as you do that. Let's see here. It's having trouble again. Okay, there we go. In step 2, we're going to question every detail of the job that you broke down in step 1. The answer to these questions have taught us practically everything we know about the world around us today and applying job methods very well. Why, what, where, when, who, and how. The 5 W's with 1 H. Ask them in order, asking them in the order that they're presented in the slide. In step 3, what we're going to do is we're going to go and develop new methods by linking actions to those questions. So for why or what questions, look for opportunities to eliminate the step. For where, when, and who, we're going to look for ways to combine or rearrange the steps. When you get to the how, you're going to have to delve into simplifying because that's all that's left. Again, it's critical to make sure that you take them in the order shown. If you ask how we do something before you ask why we do something, then what can happen is you're either going to miss an opportunity for eliminating a step or you're going to improve something that wasn't needed in the first step. So if we ask, why are we doing this, we might decide that we want to get rid of that step altogether. That's the whole linkage here and why it's so important to do those in order. As a side note, don't only question the need for the step itself, like in the example I just gave you, but also the distance or the way you do something. So if on your worksheet you're recording things like, in this case, the distance it took or the time it took to do something, ask those questions to those as well, because you may find some really good information. Record your information on the worksheet, or you can just place a check mark in the box that you've worked through the questions. In the template I showed you on the last slide, it's set up for just a checkbox. Let's see if I can go back here. Right here, so you can see in the middle of the screen, let me get rid of that. You can see here are the questions. It's set up for just a checkbox that yes, I asked it. My own preference, you can do as you see fit and works for you guys, but I like to actually expand those columns and write some details to those questions. Again, you can do whatever makes sense for your company and your implementation. All right, let me get back to where I was. All right, applying the new method. So finally in step 4, we need to actually get our ideas approved and implement them. So make sure your boss is sold on the idea. That's always a good idea, as well as those that will be working in the process. That's even more important. The value-add folks that actually have to do what your new method is proposing, you have to have some buy-in there, and ideally they should have been involved in the ideas to begin with. Make sure you consider safety, quality, production, get any approvals there if you need to, and then finally you get to put the new method to work and of course monitor it and make sure that it's effective. That can take 5 minutes, it can take a week, depending on what the process changes that you proposed were. Last but not least, and definitely not least, don't forget to celebrate and give credit where credit's due. We humans really like to be appreciated. I know I do, and I'm sure that most of you do. We all like different things. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to pay people for their ideas. Just some small token of recognition will do. Sometimes just a simple thank you. You know, one of my very favorite recognitions in the past was a handwritten note from the CEO of the company that I worked for. We had been putting in a lot of overtime and doing a lot of things, and he just said thank you, and I still have that note today. So, okay, well, that's job methods in a nutshell. You're going to repeat this process when you're ready to look at the same process again, or if you wanted to use it on another process. But whenever you're trying to improve a process, it's as simple as these 4 steps. Now let's talk about job relations, the next J program. Machines and equipment, they come with user manuals. Even the J programs come with user manuals. But people do not come with user manuals, unfortunately. Otherwise, I probably would have had a much easier time raising my 5 daughters. Supervisors, we expect them to keep their people working well in top form, doing what they're supposed to be doing, but we seldom give them the skills to lead and be leaders, which is required in order to work with people through people. Providing supervisors with the tools to solve and prevent personnel issues really becomes critical. We're just not very good at it. We want our supervisors to be able to get their folks to do what they want done, when it should be done, the way it needs to be done, and ideally because they actually want to do it for them. Like job methods, job relations has a step-by-step process, and the steps are laid out on these nifty little cards. They, again, are pretty close to the originals. The front of the card has guidelines for the foundations for good relations. The back of the card has the familiar 4 steps. Again, we're going to focus on the 4 steps on the back of the card like we did for job methods. Before beginning the 4-step method for job relations, you should determine the objective that you want to achieve. Without it, you may think you've solved a problem only to find that you never really got to the root cause. These may seem silly and obvious, but you'd be surprised how often it's not and how important it can be. What even makes the thing you're going to work on a problem? I mean, that's a question you have to ask yourself. Not everything can be considered a problem. Make sure you set your intention by understanding what it is that you're trying to accomplish or want to have happen. Be sure that this is a business problem that is causing, even a business issue. If Sue's mad at Bob, but it's not affecting the business, then you may want to reconsider intervening. Now remember, this is what we're teaching our supervisors. Make sure you gather information about who's involved or who's impacted so that later we can also talk to them and find out if there's any missing information that we need. You're going to use your pocket card, walk through the problem at hand. The 4-step method is going to give you everything you need in order to solve people problems in the workplace. It really does. It seems like 4 steps is just too simplified, but it's not. Remember, you're not gaining knowledge here. You're trying to gain a skill. That means you have to actually practice this in order to get really good at it. If you remember the slide back a while ago with the needs, we had 2 knowledge needs and we had 3 skills needs. The J programs are all about gaining skills. Therefore, we must actually practice. Put it into real practice, and you'll see later as we talk about the sessions, that's a large part of doing the training. So step 1 is all about gathering the facts before attempting to make any type of a decision. That's hard for us. We like to jump to decisions. The facts when dealing with people aren't always data and physical evidence. You need to know that you have to include what people think and how people feel in that discovery process. This can be really uncomfortable for some people. That's why we practice. So if you're not one of those people that likes to talk to people about how they feel and what they think, then you may need more practice than others. Make sure that you understand all of those involved or concerned with the current situation, and make sure that you get facts from them as well, not just the person that you're dealing with. Assuming you understand how a situation affects another can cause you to make bad decisions and take poor actions. So the discovery phase is again, it's very important to how you get to your decisions. Step 2 is taking all that information, weighing it, and deciding what actions you're going to take, if any at all. Sometimes no actions are necessary at all. You almost have to be a real detective here, looking for gaps and contradictions. Consider whether one of the facts has any bearings on any of the others. Sometimes, they do. There's usually going to be several action options, including no action at all, like I said. Before you decide, check for any policies that might dictate your decision or any practices that are common. We don't want to throw out some decision and only to find out that it's against the rules. If something, so there's the side of the policies, but then there's the side of the practices as well. If there's something that has been allowed across the company in other areas, then it might require that your action be focused at a higher level within the organization, because it's not necessarily breaking a policy, but you don't necessarily want to go slap one person's hands for doing something that everybody else is allowed to do. So we do need to look at practices. Finally, you're going to make sure that whatever action you apply is going to serve the objective you defined in the beginning and cause the effect that you were hoping for. This is huge, and I find this even in my personal life. Sometimes before I start dealing with a conflict or a people issue, and before I start responding to something, I have to ask myself, what is it that I'm trying to get here? What is it that I want to happen? And if I go to make that decision and I reflect on what my answers to were those and it doesn't match, then I know I need to go back and ask those same questions again, or I need to change my decision. So that's actually one of the biggest key factors, I think, in the step 2 is considering the objective and the effect before you actually decide on the decision and the action you want to make. With the decision for the action made, once you've done that, you now need to actually take the action, but before you do, there are a couple of things you want to consider. Step 3 begins by deciding who's going to handle putting the action into place. It may not be you. Who's actually responsible for this? You may need to involve human resources or other entities within your organizations. Could be legal even. Make sure that what you're about to put into place is within your scope of authority. If not, hand it off to your supervisor or the appropriate supervisor. While you don't want to make this issue take forever to solve, you also don't want to act in haste. There's a really fine line between acting quickly and waiting too long, and neither one of them is wonderful. All right, step 4, you need to follow up. Action without follow-up is simply empty. This decision should be formal and communicated to the employee. So you're going to make that decision and you're going to talk to them about it. Are you going to follow up next week? Are you going to follow up at the next employee evaluation? Let them know. Are you going to follow up more than once? So an example might be that you decide you're going to have monthly status meetings on the issue for the next 6 months with this employee. Again, communicate it to the person you're dealing with so they know exactly what to expect. A lot of what you're seeing in the job relations training has a lot to do with transparency, and in communication in general, transparency can make or break a good resolution. Don't say you're going to follow up and then forget, though. So if you say that you're going to have monthly meetings with this employee over the next 6 months, don't miss those meetings. Make sure that you are committed. Put them on the calendar. If you miss one, what does that tell the person that you have been dealing with? It tells them, either that this wasn't important, that they're not important. It tells them that, they can get away with, letting it go. It tells them all sorts of things. Just like your kids. If you tell them to clean their room and then you don't go actually look to see if they clean their rooms, they probably haven't. And maybe the first time they did, but they catch on quick. They're smart little buggers. During your monitoring, make sure you're watching for changes in either output, attitude, or relationships. You're going to be looking for not only issues, but also improvements. Remember, most of our intent is to make something good happen, right? In your follow-up, you're going to want to be able to report on all 3 of those. So, for instance, it could be, John, I noticed that productivity doesn't really seem to be affected by this situation anymore, which is really good. However, I did notice that you're still having a bit of an attitude, and I see that it's still affecting your relationship with your coworkers. Let's talk about that a little bit. So you need to look at all 3 of those. If you follow the steps, For job relations, for employee issues, all of them, any of them that arise, you're going to find that the issues become less volatile. As a matter of fact, in time, you're going to find an entirely different culture brewing, which is what we're really all after. You don't want your employees to be the 80% that leave their jobs because of their supervisors. If their supervisors can handle situations in an effective, efficient manner, then employees are going to be much happier with that. Okay. Job instruction is admittedly my favorite. Maybe that's because I'm an instructor and there's nothing more satisfying than a student that actually learns from what I teach them. The way to get to a person, or the way to get a person to quickly remember how to do a job correctly, safely, and consciously. That's what we're after. As before with the other J programs, job instruction has a card. The front of the card has instructions for what to do before instructing people. The back of the card has the familiar 4 steps. Again, we're going to jump right into the back of the card. I'm having, oh, there we go. All right. In step 1, the instructor needs to do several things to put the worker in the right frame of mind. These may seem like simplistic and even foolish things to waste time with, but they really are important. The trainee needs to be receptive to learning, or you're going to be wasting your time. So start by putting the person at ease. This can be anything from introducing yourself if they don't know you to talking about their weekend. You can just make small talk. Some people are going to be more nervous than others, so you need to be prepared for that. From there, what we want to do is state the job that the person is going to learn. So what is it that we're actually teaching them? Find out if the person has any knowledge of this job already. If they can, excuse me, if they do, it can help sometimes. Sometimes it can hurt. Sometimes people come into training with their own predisposed ideas of how something should be done. You need to be aware of the potential for that happening. You also need to be aware if the person is completely new to the job so that you can tailor your training to that. Talk a little bit about the job to get the person interested in learning it. Helping them understand how important that job is can help. You know, some jobs are going to seem very menial and uninteresting to people, but obviously if it's something that needs to be done, there's some importance, and if we can help them understand that, training may be a little bit more conducive and effective. Finally, you're going to make sure that the person is in the correct position for learning. So this is physically. If they're right-handed, stand over their left shoulder or to the left of them so that they can see you. The last thing you want to do is you don't want to stand in front of them, because what happens? You're opposite. So their right hand becomes the left hand. Now, if it's a job that it doesn't matter what hand you do it with, it's less important. But some things it matter, and so you want to make sure that they're seeing what you want them to see. Now that the student's receptive to learning, the instructor can move into the actual presentation of the operation. So it's important in this step to give a careful and detailed demonstration of the job to the trainee while explaining what it is that you're demonstrating. So you're actually showing them and then telling them what you're doing. The first time you do this, the first time through, you're going to begin with telling the trainee how many steps there are and then demonstrating each step. This always becomes kind of funny when I'm teaching it, because it seems very repetitive and redundant, and it becomes kind of a laugh, but it actually is very important to say the same things over and over again. So you're going to use pictures or illustrations if necessary, but what you're going to be saying is something like this. There are 5 important steps to this job. Step 1 is while you're showing them. Step 2 is while you're showing them that part, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to do that as you go through showing them what it is that they're doing each time. Now the second time, so that's the first time. The second time through, you're going to be focused again on each of the important steps, only this time you're going to add any what we call key points or special tricks about each step. You're going to repeat this one until the trainee feels comfortable to try it on their own. And again, if they're an experienced worker, they might catch it after 1 or 2 times, but if they're beginners, they might need a little bit more repetition. This is an example of what we call a job instruction breakdown sheet. This one is actually from the original exercise done in the training back in World War II. The job is to tie. The job on this one is to tie what we call a fire underwriter's knot. For those of you that are listening that are old enough to remember these are those twisted lamp cords that were common back then. They had the cloth over them. The knot in the cord was very important to the quality and safety of the product, so effective training was critical. So this is one of the things that they trained on. Step 1 on twist and straighten, the key point is that it had to be 6 inches. The reason it had to be 6 inches was because if it was too long, we were going to have to trim or scrap some, which would take us some time, and if it was too short, we'd have to rework it and possibly scrap it as well. The second step was a right-handed loop in front, and the key point was to make sure that the loop came in front of the main strand. The reason, because if it goes behind it, then it's not going to act as a strain relief, and so forth and so on. So you can see the steps here. Each one has a key point, and there are reasons for each of those key points. What bad thing will happen if we don't do the things we said in the key points? So this is a little bit different than the breakdown. They kind of have the same names, but it is different than the breakdown sheet we did in job methods. This is a document for the instructor, not the student. I can't emphasize that enough. This is not a document that you hand somebody you're training. This is for use by the instructor. It lists each of those steps, and then again, the instructor is going to go through them and saying there are 5 important steps to this job. Step 1 is this, the key point is that, the reason is this, step 2 is this. Again, seeming very redundant, but keeping it simple makes it so that the learner learns. In step 3, we're going to allow the trainee to try the job just as soon as they're comfortable. So step 2, we did it for them, we showed them, we told them. Now they're going to do it on their own. Make sure that they know that you don't expect them to get it right the first time. The first time through, the trainee should do the job silently. So you're going to just tell them, don't talk, just do, let me watch you. And as they perform the operation, you're going to just correct errors as they're made. The second time that the trainee goes and demonstrates it, they're going to do the same thing, but this time they're going to state the important steps as they do them. So they're going to mimic you. So they're going to do step 1, and they're going to state step 1 is blah, 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 and do it. This doesn't have to be verbatim. They don't have to say it exactly. All you need to know as the instructor is that they understood the content. You're going to go through each important step one at a time, recap the step after the trainee finishes, and then repeat it as necessary until the trainee can do and say each of the important steps. The third time around, or wherever you're at in that sequence, includes the important steps as well as the trainee stating the key points and the reasons for each of the steps. So what we're trying to do is get it stuck in their head, the important part of it, because it's one thing to just do, monkey see, monkey do, but to understand those key concepts and the things that are going to make or break the step, those critical characteristics or critical to quality, that's another thing. That's going to help with quality and rework and those kinds of things down the line. You're going to make sure that you're helping the learner distinguish between the important steps and the key points. Sometimes that gets confused by them because it can be confusing. Quiz the trainee on the steps and the key points. If that seems like they're struggling, but one way or another, just make sure that they get it. Continue until you know that they know. Step 4 is where we're going to put the trainee on their own and make sure that they know that it's their responsibility to do the job correctly. The instructor should advise the worker how much work is expected over a specific period of time. Do you want 100 a day, 5 per hour, what is it? This allows the worker to pace themselves based on some expectation of yours. Make sure that they know that you don't expect them to be perfect right away at hitting those numbers, because they probably won't be. Also make sure the worker knows who to go ask questions to. As their supervisor, the most appropriate person is probably you, but that's not always going to be possible. So if you need to designate somebody, introduce them to that person and make sure that they know that that's the person they need to go to. You do not want workers feeling compelled to ask other people because they don't know who to ask. Check back frequently. Make sure that you're not leaving them alone for too long, especially in the beginning. Make sure that the worker doesn't feel hesitant to ask questions. They shouldn't. That's that culture of questioning. You want to ensure that the asking questions is not only okay, but it's expected. And then finally, you can taper off as they gain experience, and pretty soon that they'll be on their own and they'll be fine. If the worker hasn't learned, the instructor hasn't taught. That is one of the key tenets to the job instruction method. It's one, as an instructor, that I don't take lightly. The supervisor has the responsibility of ensuring that the workers perform their jobs. And the best way to do that is making sure that we have effective training. Okay, so what can we expect from TWI? You can expect lots of good things. The first thing you can expect is some common traits between the programs. We talked about that a little bit already. All of them are based on a learn-by-doing approach. Each set of the training is going to include practice with actual jobs or problems in the trainee's respective areas. Remember, we're using the exact same training session format that they did 70 years ago. The format for all of the training sessions follow a 5x2 format, 5 sessions, 2 hours each, for a total of 10 hours. So if you're teaching job instructions, you're going to have 10 hours. If you're teaching job relations, it's 10 hours, and so forth. Session 1 is all about demonstrating. Session 2, you're going to walk through the 4-step process. Session 3 to 5, that's the real practice. So we spend more time on the practicing side of things. It's highly recommended that you keep the training sessions to no more than 10 trainees. If you get any more than that, you start to dilute some of the information and you don't have enough time to spend with people. Finally, each of the training sessions comes with a training manual that lays out everything you need to hold the sessions. Each program has their own, and you can download these off of the internet these days anymore. They're all over the place. And again, there's no reason to create your own. We all use the same ones from years ago. This is just a basic guideline for deciding who could benefit from being in each of the TWI sessions. It's only a guideline, though, so there's somebody in your organization that you think would benefit from learning one of the programs, put them in the training. It certainly won't hurt to have them there. In job instruction, typically that's anyone who instructs another person in how to do a job. Usually it's a supervisor, but it could be just an experienced employee. Job methods, supervisors, any designated employee, anybody that you want to improve things. Job relations, that's typically anybody that has job responsibilities that requires them to work with people, especially supervisors, union officers, those kind of things. Program development, that's really senior sponsors of the program, implementation committees, those kind of folks. If you want to learn more, there's many more options than these. My 2 favorites, Training Within Industry, Don DeNiro, and then the TWI Workbook by Patrick Goff and Bob Rona are great resources. Of course, at any time, if you want to, you are welcome to reach out to me at any time. Kind of going back to in the beginning, Paul said if you want copies of the slides, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at that email address. Always happy to share my knowledge and experience. That is all for me. I feel like I went through that in a whirlwind. Thanks for being a great audience. I really appreciate, again, being able to share my experience. I guess this is where we're at.
Chris, thank you very much. As I was sitting and listening to that, I thought, I know what TWI is before we even talked about it. And as I listened to you, there's so much that I didn't even realize. So I just appreciate the depth that you went into. We have several questions. Just a note for everybody. We are 3 minutes left. We've only got a handful of questions, and so we should be probably another 10 minutes or so. We're going to go ahead and stay on the webinar. If you need to leave, be sure and come back and you can listen to all the questions on the recorded webinar on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar, I should say the YouTube page. So go visit there. The first question is, how do you apply TWI to a position where the work is not repetitive? A couple of specific examples Beth had was office work, knowledge work. Someone had a question about sales. How do you apply to the TWI concepts to those?
Well, the funny thing that I found over the years, and it doesn't just apply to TWI, but a lot of people will come to me and they'll go, yeah, but it doesn't, I do custom stuff. Everything's different. It's we're a make to order. We're in the office. It's true that in those settings we often have things, big things that don't repeat. But if you really look at the processes, you're going to find that there are elements to every job, even if it's custom, that do repeat. And those would be the ones that you would work on. Now, I'm assuming in that case you're talking about job instruction. But really, it applies almost everywhere. You just have to look at the elements of the job or the process that do repeat, because there are some. In sales, you're looking at sales. Yes, every sale, I should say, is different, but there are elements of that sale that will repeat, and you can apply those. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Here's another question. How can I estimate how much time it will take to do each of the J programs? And I know this was an earlier question. I know that you kind of alluded to that a little bit on the last slide. So I get maybe a little clarification.
Yeah. So the training sessions, they are all exactly the same. They're 5 by 2. Each session is 10 hours. Now remember, that's for 10 people. So if you have more than that, you've got to repeat it. But if you're teaching job instruction to a group of 10 supervisors, you're going to meet 5 days for 2 hours each. And those days will be not far apart. You don't want them a month apart. You want, like, this week we're going to do 5 days in a row, or at the least maybe once a week or something like that. So they're all the same, 10 hours.
Okay. What's the difference between job methods and standardized work? I noticed that some of the forms looked similar.
Yeah, I think we've definitely evolved a little bit. The biggest difference for me, and the reason I like the TWI side of things, is because it's a very structured methodology. I love the idea of 4 simple steps. The other thing is, with standardization, you go out there and you Google it, or I teach it to you, or somebody else teaches it to you. There's really not a standard to standardization across a large group of people. Everybody wants to put their own spin on it. And if you're using TWI to standardize, which is really what you're doing, then you're allowing that methodology, that structure, to really guide you and dictate and make sure that you don't forget certain elements of it.
There are many methods for job relations in our current literature. I'm assuming we're talking about new methods in terms of how to relate to people and work with people. Have you found resistance at implementing job relations from existing HR departments?
I actually have not personally. That's not to say there are none out there. The folks that I've worked with that actually welcomed it. Now, what has happened, though, is they've stuck with those 4 steps, but you can see within those steps there are elements that can be expanded upon. So, for instance, if you're going to look at, I was just trying to think of one in particular, as far as facts, gathering facts, or talking with people. Let's use talking with people. You need to go gather some facts with talking with people. There's some methods for doing that. So you just really take the newer details of how you do that and you mesh them with the step itself. So there's nothing that says you can't elaborate on each of those steps. You just have to make sure you do each of those steps. And so that's what I've seen. Like I said, I have not had any resistance from HR. They've just asked to be involved and to be able to give guidance to those steps themselves. And I welcome that.
Okay, just a reminder to everybody, if you do have any questions, we still have time to have Chris answer those questions. Explain the difference, again, I know you did this, between key points and important steps. I think it was slide 51.
Yeah, so key steps are the actual steps. So when we did our breakdown, we broke the job down into those steps. So those are actual things, activities. When you get to the key points, those are the important things to remember about the step. So if you remember back in the slide, and I probably could jump back into it here. Oops, no, I can't because I just messed up. If you remember the slide that had the fire underwriter's knot on it, the very first step, the important thing was that it had to be 6 inches. So instead of saying, cut this wire, the activity is cut the wire. The important part, the key thing, is that it has to be 6 inches, and the reason why is because if you had it too short, then it wasn't going to work and you could have scrap. If it was too long, you were going to have to cut it down and those kind of things. So the step is the activity. The key point is what you need to remember when you're doing that step. What's the critical to quality or critical to safety kind of thing.
Okay. You talked about doing training in groups, like you said, 10 or more. Can it be done on, or 10 or less, I'm sorry. Can it be done on individual training as well?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you just don't want more than 10 because you're going to dilute the time in sessions 3 to 5. You're going to dilute the time that you have to spend with people actually practicing, and practicing, since these are skills, is the most important part. So yeah, one-on-one, sure, absolutely.
Okay. We had another person ask again about slides. That last slide that came up that Chris put up, if you contact Chris directly, she can get you connected with a set of slides. One last question here on slide 52. You mentioned not to give the job instruction to the operator. Why? Wouldn't it help for self-directed teams?
What ends up happening, remember, and this is probably the hardest concept I had with TWI, is in the beginning, was because I always wanted to use, I always wanted to think about training somebody and what that training tool was that I was going to give them. What we're doing with TWI is we're training the instructor. We're not training the person. We're training the instructor to train the person, if that makes sense. I know it's a kind of a tongue twister there. And so that particular tool is used to help the instructor know how to train. Now, that can become a standard that all trainers would use, but and you may use something similar with your student, but that particular document is meant specifically for that that instructor. I don't know if that helps. It's like I said, that was a hard one for me as well, because my first thought was I just want to give it to them and then tell them to read this and then go follow it. But are we any better off if we do that than where we're at now with our own training programs? I can tell you, like I said, this works, and we have to give the instructors the tools that they need, and one of the tools that they need is a guide on how am I going to instruct this person, and what are all of the things that I have to make sure that I cover. In training, I found that's the thing that happens the most. That's the most detrimental, is that we train and we're not consistent and we miss points. That document helps the instructor make sure that they don't miss any points. I hope that helps.
Okay. Chris, I just want to thank you very much. That's all the questions we have. I've been sitting here while I'm listening to you, and I'm on my phone sending myself emails to remind me to apply some of the things that you've been talking about to our existing program. I just really appreciate you taking your time to come and help us learn more about what TWI is. Is there any last comments or any last thing you would like to say before we close?
The only thing that I'll end with is that well, two things. I know this was a whirlwind of here's TWI, in an hour. There's a lot more to it. I hope you'll give it a chance. The other thing is that, like anything else, don't be afraid to go out and try it. But don't give up on it the first time, because like anything, practice when you're doing something new is uncomfortable, and it's not until you actually put it into play and see it work that you have some pretty big ahas and start gaining those benefits from it. So I just encourage everybody to try it.
Okay.
That is all I have. Thank you very much, Paul. Again, I really appreciate you allowing me the time to share.
I am Paul Harbath, the 2016 Chair of the American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division webinar series. I want to thank Chris for her presentation and thank you for listening to Training Within Industry, TWI. If you have any questions about the content of this webinar, feel free to contact Chris directly. Next month, our presenter will be Ron Mascatelli. Ron is one of the industry leaders in applying lean concepts to product development. Ron has written several books on the subject: The Lean Product Development Guide, Mastering Lean Product Development, and Building a Project-Driven Enterprise. Ron has worked with over 150 leading companies worldwide to implement his highly practical approach to lean product development. You don't want to miss this webinar. The American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division webinar series is the place for you to hear the best of the best in the lean industry and learn more about how to apply lean in your application. The American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division is a global network of professionals helping individuals and organizations apply proven and leading-edge lean principles and practices to achieve dramatic results for your personal and organizational success. Come lean with us.